All right, class. Hope everyone is still doing well. We're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the volumes. I'm just going to go through some of it very quickly. We're not going to read the whole thing. But volume one starts off in this kind of dystopian landscape, a cityscape. We have this Jordan Tower, which we learn is where all the broadcasting takes place. And you see they have, barbed wire and cameras that say for your protection and stuff. This is playing into the dystopian theme. Now you'll notice that this bubble here, the way that it's jagged, that indicates that this is coming from an electronic source. And we know that it's the broadcast that they listen to in the evening. And we have the character Evie here. She's getting ready. And there's kind of this back and forth between Evie getting ready and this shadowy character in this weird room with all of this stuff, these movie posters and things. We later find out that this is V and that he is in the Shadow Gallery. I probably should have mentioned Shadow Gallery in the themes. It's like his secret lair. You know, it's his fortress of solitude. It's his bat cave. This is a common theme in the superhero trope for them to have a lair or a place of refuge where they can escape the madness of the conflict in which they are embroiled. So we have her getting ready, and we can judge by her clothing here that she's not exactly going to a formal event, right? And then V putting on the mask. Of course, here's the first sign of the Guy Fawkes mask. We see her putting on like over the top blush, makeup. She kind of looks like a clown even with these little dots right here. And that's, I think, probably intentional. So then we have V looking at himself in the mirror, and it's like a show mirror, like he's getting ready for a show. He's put on the wig, he's put on the costume. And chapter one is called The Villain. So if we begin and we figure out who Evie is, she's a young, an adolescent girl who is basically turned to prostitution out of desperation, which is kind of sad, right? But it is a unfortunate reality that she finds herself in, where the society does not care for her needs, and she does not have anyone to care for her. As we mentioned in the introductory video, she lost her father and mother at a young age. She became an orphan. She basically worked in a sweatshop. And so now she's been forced into this position where in order to make ends meet, she has to sell herself. But unfortunately, we have an incident where the person she is sort of soliciting it turns out to be a fingerman, which is the name for like the police service. And they act as a brutal arm of the fascist state. And they attack her, and basically the indication is that they intend to sort of have their way with her in this way. And then she's like, please don't kill me. We see the sign that says strength through purity, purity through faith, emphasizing the religious overtones of the fascist government, the state religion. And then, just in the nick of time, we have the shadowy figure V. And he is actually quoting literature. V quotes literature a lot. And I'm sort of bummed that I switched the order of these, because he quotes some of the poems that we're going to read, and that's kind of interesting. But right now he is quoting Macbeth, which is a Shakespeare play. He says the multiplying villainies of nature do swarm upon him, and he basically intervenes, saves Evie, throws a grenade. He has a fake hand that blows up in this guy's face. He basically saves the day, right? Continuing the hero vibe. And then he takes her up to a rooftop where they have a brief conversation. And then all of a sudden the howls, when he says, remember the 5th of November, the gunpowder treason and plot, I know of no reason why the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. As he says that the Houses of Parliament, as you can see, this is Big Ben here, explode. Now, if you were a British reader, this would be a big deal to you. It would be like, the Statue of Liberty or something exploding within the first 3 pages of the text. And this is obviously a terroristic act. It's an act of destruction, and they have done this as kind of a way to shock you from the start, right? And Evie sees what happened. Did you really do that? Then there's the fireworks with the V in the sky. There's a lot of showmanship involved. And of course, this sends the city into like a frenzy. They're like, oh my God, the Houses of Parliament have been destroyed. I love this shot here where he takes her down off the ledge and the fires raging behind. Then we get Chancellor Susan at the fake computer. He's very angry at what has happened. He's been wounded. He's yelling at his henchmen to try to get control of the society. They've lost a major propaganda victory. They decide through the Jordan Tower that they're going to broadcast that it was a controlled demolition. And you have this funny bit with this fella here and Mr. Almond and the bitter almond joke. I thought that was pretty funny. Then we learn who Louis Prothero is. He's the voice of fate. He's higher up in the government. He's the one that's broadcasting all of this stuff, even though the people think that it's the fate supercomputer. And they decide they're going to say it's a controlled demolition and try to get out ahead of the explosion. Of course, who would blow up Parliament? It really doesn't make any sense. Okay, well, the color has kind of gone wonky there. Not really sure why. Give me one sec. Well, I think I mistakenly highlighted it. And anyway, we'll just keep going. Hopefully it normalizes. So back in the Shadow Gallery, Evie has been taken to the Shadow Gallery. She's able to experience all this art and music and stuff. And we didn't even really, she didn't even really know that this stuff existed. Things like Motown and jazz. And so we see that V is a collector of culture. He collects art and literature and music. All of the things that the fascist government suppresses, that's what V is into. We then have this incident on the train where Commander Prothero is there, and we see V coming, and then he gets on the train, and Commander Prothero is telling this horrible story about sexual abuse. He's acting like it's a joke, and he asks the other gentlemen if they like dolls, which is a weird thing. Why is this man who's like a military guy higher up in the government, why does he like dolls? Why does he play with dolls? Very bizarre. And then finally we have the lights go out. He jumps on the train, and then we see the aftermath wherein this is Inspector Finch. He's a very important character, and Inspector Finch is trying to get to the bottom of what happened to Commander Prothero. He's investigating the scene. They realize this guy must have had superhuman reflexes. He did most of this stuff with his hands, was able to jump on the train and do all this stuff with his hands like he's some kind of superhuman, right? And so they are really concerned about this, and they're concerned of the fact that V just seemed to be able to slaughter these men like cattle and didn't really even think about them. So we know that he has some kind of vendetta, right, which is a sort of a desire for vengeance, and that's what he's after. Now, in this next scene, we have him trying to comfort Evie because he disappears, and she goes through this like fears of abandonment, like he's left her in there, he's not going to come back. So we see that she's deeply stricken by the loss of her family and the issues that have arisen, particularly the issues with losing her father at a young age. So she kind of views him as a father, as a surrogate, as a family. She tells him his story about the recession and growing up through the nuclear holocaust and how it caused all the weather to go bad and the floods to come, and then the Norse Fire thing. So we see the flag here with the N. It says Norse Fire. The fascist groups, the right-wingers, they'd all come together with some of the big corporations that have survived. Norse Fire, they called themselves. And again, Norse Fire is a reference to Nordic peoples and sort of Hitler's obsession with them. And so she talks about how they took away her father, and she worked in a sweatshop, and then she had to sell herself, and then she brings up the fact that he saved her, and so she feels comforted by him, and like he's a father, and she is a child. The emphasis here is that the main character is a child. Now we're going to watch her evolve over the course of 10 volumes from being a scared little girl to something else. So that transformation is important. Now, Louis Prothero has found himself at the Lark Hill resettlement camp, and he seems to know where he is. So that should tell you that this is somehow related to the story at large, this resettlement camp. Of course, that's a double-speak term, resettlement. This is a concentration camp, right? There's a lot of executions and stuff that went on there. Inspector Finch goes back to talk to the Supreme Leader. He gets information. And There is some conflict between the leader and Inspector Finch. He doesn't really trust Inspector Finch. It's implied in that scene. And then we go back to the Shadow Gallery with Evie and V. And V dresses up like this vaudeville character. And if you don't know what vaudeville is, it's like an old style performance, like circus, sort of over the top act that was popular back in the day. And he's dressed up like a vaudeville character. There's a lot of like ventriloquism and stuff, and it's just really kitschy and kind of funny stuff. So he goes to Louis Prothero, and he says, "Good morning, campers," and he's clearly like torturing this guy psychologically and trying to make him face up to the crimes that he committed as a consequence of his time at Lark Hill, where he oversaw the concentration camp. We learn, and we talk about he brings him to this room where we have all these dolls dressed like prisoners, and this is Louis Prothero's doll collection. We know he's a big doll collector, and he has the dolls here lined up. He starts freaking out. "What are you doing with my dolls? Oh my God! If you've damaged them, they're priceless." So we see this material obsession and this weird, just like no grown man should be this caught up with dolls. And V says this really interesting line here: "Admirable concern, Commander, yet it is odd, isn't it, how you could so much concern for porcelain and plastic and so little for flesh and blood." And indeed, the obsession with the dolls mirrors the Chancellor's obsession with the fake computer. They're not able to love and make meaningful relationships. They're only able to love like doppelgangers or mannequins, like things that aren't even human, which is very strange. And then we have the big reveal. He's the man from Room 5. So that's kind of, we're building up like, who's the man from Room 5? What does he have to do with what's going on? And then, of course, he burns his dolls, and it breaks him psychologically. And when we find him later, they just have him in a chair. He's saying, "Mama, Mama, Mama." So he's broken his mind. He has destroyed this man's mentality, and he did so by destroying his doll collection and basically torturing him and stuff. And so that's the end of the first volume with the first sort of victim of V. And it's this awful guy that ran a concentration camp, and he tortures him in a way that mirrors what he did. So this is what we mean by vendetta. Vendetta, desire for vengeance. Whoever this codename V is, he has a history with this concentration camp, and he is trying to execute some manner of vengeance to make sure that the people who did that to him and to others are brought to justice. Okay, so that's volume 1. Hopefully you're enjoying this. I think it's an interesting piece the way it's done. I'm not sure why the color went out, but this one seems to be fine. We'll zoom it in a good bit. Now we start here. This is a building called the Old Bailey, and this is Lady Justice on top of it. So we see that we start with another iconic English building, and then we're talking about the Chancellor, and he's explaining who he is and what his belief in strength and unity, and his obsession with fascism. There's the image of fascism being a Roman invention and it being represented by a bundle of twigs, because one twig could be broken, but a bundle would prevail. So everyone must be the same. They must strive to be a uniform twig, and then the society will be upheld. So it has to do with this ideal model for what society is, and this forced conformity. You must conform to this model, or you will be you'll have a hard time. Let's say. And so he has this whole thing. It says here he's never known the peace that lies between the thighs of a woman. The implication being that he is a virgin. He's a virginal, loveless man who is obsessed with his computer. And he goes in here and like talks about how much he loves the computer, and he's like running his hands over it and stuff in this very strange way. And he tells the computer, "I love you," at the end. And then back to V at the Old Bailey, and he's talking to this. He's talking to Lady Liberty like she's an unfaithful lover. And he's basically accusing her of infidelity and doing the voices for her. So we see that V is a little bit, he's a little crazy, and he's having this conversation with Madam Justice and accusing her of abandoning her ideal and not representing what she's supposed to. And so he calls her out for infidelity, for cheating on him, basically calls her a Jezebel, and then he leaves this Valentine's box at the bottom, which obviously has a bomb in it, and he destroys it. So we have the second monument destroyed. He says, "The flames of freedom, how lovely, how just. Ah, my precious anarchy. Oh, beauty, till now I never knew thee." So we see he's destroying the ideal of justice as the society itself can provide it, and accepting this idea of anarchy. But we also see that he's a little bit unhinged, and like his motivations are kind of erratic, right? Why is he doing this, and why is he having these weird conversations with himself on rooftops? He's a very interesting character because he's so complex in that way. And then we're back to Mr. Prothero. He's not answering their questions. Mr. Finch is trying to get him. All they can get out of him is mama, mama. But finally he says five, room five, because Inspector Finch said, let's take 5, and that triggers him to say that. So they know 5, which the Roman numeral for 5 is V. We know that there's some connection there. Back in the Shadow Gallery, December 15th, 1997, she says, V, 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 V. And he says, Evie, Evie, Evie. He's messing with her. And then apparently that's a description, an inscription from his mirror, which is a motto, Vi veri vini viserum vivus visi. It's in Latin. It means, by the power of truth, I, while living, have conquered the universe. That is a quote from Faust, who is an alchemist in the 15th century who supposedly sold his soul to the devil for infinite power and truth and knowledge and all that stuff. And so V is equating himself with this character and really equating himself with the devil in that way. And why? Why the devil? The devil is a character that incites all kinds of emotions in people, and none of them are really positive. But he seems to be embracing this. He says he made a deal too, like meaning Dr. Faust made a deal, I made a deal, right? Evie has agreed to help him with the next thing he's going to do. So then we're at Westminster Abbey. This is the big like cathedral that's in London. We have this dreary sermon from Bishop Lilliman on and on about the evil and Satan, an avatar of damnation, trying to destroy us, and let us, let us through Jesus Christ, let us avoid this evil. And then of course we see later that he himself is evil. Outside we have this conversation between several important characters, and we see that Derek Almond, who is the head of the Finger at the start of the first few volumes, he is very abusive towards his wife and very mean to her, and that is important later. Then we have Bishop Lilliman in his quarters, and he's talking to the person, his hand or whatever, and basically the implication is that he's going to be brought a young girl to his quarters, presumably for sexual abuse. And when she shows up, it's Evie. And he says, well, I hope she's not too old. 15, is that too old? So this is a real sick guy here. And, there is a lot of history with, the abuse of children in certain religious institutions. So I think that's a continuation of that theme and that sort of notion. And she shows up. And then we have, I love this, we have V in the Shadow Gallery, and he's picking roses. This is from William Blake, who's probably my favorite poet ever. And it's from a poem called Jerusalem, which we're going to read when we get to poetry. And it says, bring me my bow. I'm sorry. What is it? Bring me my, what is that word? I know the poem, but the text can be kind of, bow. Bring me my bow of burning gold. Bring me my arrows of desire. Bring me my spear, O clouds unfold. Bring me my chariot of fire. I will not cease from mental fight, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand, till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land. William Blake was very much steeped in religious iconography and religious themes, and then we have Westminster Abbey. So we see that V is going to purify the religious institutions. He's going to bring God back to the people in a weird way, but he's also equating himself with the devil. There's a lot of weird binaries and stuff going on here. It's a cool volume 2. Dean's Yard, Westminster Abbey. They're talking about the bishop and what he's doing up there, and they're drinking wine. They're kind of slacking, right? And the Lord provides. There'd be no peace for the wicked, but the righteous can get a peace whenever they feel like it. So they're all making jokes about how this guy's abusing children. It's really sick. And then while we're in the room, she opens a window, and then we see V setting up for his next move. She opens the window, and Bishop Lilliman tries to lure her into the bedroom. And we see on this bed, this is his bed quarters, that's an upside-down star. So that is really mistakenly equated as a satanic symbol, but that is the implication here, that the bishop himself is an agent of the devil, which why we see it. You probably didn't notice that the first time through, and that's what's so cool about graphic novels, is that they have these little clues and stuff that you can find in the images. But V breaks in, he kills the guards, goes up to the room, jumps in through the window. The bishop is making his move on Evie, and she cracks him over the head with a lamp, just whacks him real good. He calls her a bunch of names and says he's going to kill her and goes after her. And look, when he gets to the door, there's V. And he says, "Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a man of wealth and taste." If you know that quote, you get a banana sticker, a golden star. That is a quote from the Rolling Stones, "Sympathy for the Devil." And then he takes off his hat, and here are the horns. A lot of literary and music references and cultural references in this text. As an English teacher, I just eat it up. So if you don't know that song, "Sympathy for the Devil," Rolling Stones, I recommend you go home and listen to it. It's a groovy little tune. Do people still say groovy anymore? Anyway, here's the tower where they broadcast everything, where they listen to everything. Sorry, this is the ear. This is with like the domestic surveillance, and they're listening. So they even have like they're spying on their own people. They have like microphones in the bishop's chamber, and they hear what's going on. They hear that he's being attacked, and he says, "I do not have a name. You may call me V." And they start freaking out. And he says, "The Lord is my shepherd, therefore I can lack nothing. He shall feed me in green pasture and lead me forth beside the waters of comfort." So he's he's quoting scripture to the bishop in a way that is really like, it makes us uneasy. And then we see it's too late. By the time they arrive, the bishop is already dead. The V is on the wall. They find the rose. They're trying to figure out who he is. They're panicking about it. And then the Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, da-da-da-dum, which is Morse code for V. So he's got this V theme that he does all the time. He puts on that music when he executed the bishop. How did he execute the bishop? Very poetically, I might say, with a communion wafer made of cyanide. And they make that comment about transubstantiation. Transubstantiation is mostly a Catholic concept that the host transforms into the literal body of Christ. And they say that when he ate it, by the time it reached his belly, it was still cyanide, meaning it didn't change into the body of Christ. It was still cyanide, and it killed him. And that's kind of a poetic justice, sort of like a bit of gallows humor on the part of V. So we see, like, he's a sick puppy. V has a real hatred and a real, like, quest for revenge, and he's very artful and uses a lot of imagery and stuff in the way that he does things. So now moving on to Volume 3. Volume 3 is, we have the body of the bishop being examined by the coroner, and he's talking to the coroner, Inspector Finch. She picks up a rose, and the way that she looks at it, she looks very concerned and like put off, and we see her like holding her throat, like she's disturbed. So that's an implication, a bit of foreshadowing that she actually has something to do with this whole catastrophe that V is angry about. Then we go back to the shadow gallery where Evie is accosting V for she didn't know that he was going to kill him, and she's mad that he killed him, even though the guy's an obvious monster. She doesn't want to be involved in anything related to killing, but he says, "Oh, you'll learn, Evie. You'll learn. Like you'll see what my vision is all about." And so he just kind of brushes her off in that way. Then we're back to Derek Almond and his wife, and we see that he's very abusive. He strikes her. He accuses her of not being attractive enough for him, and not making herself attractive and all that stuff, and leaves her on the floor, and he cleans his gun. And then we're back to V, and she says, sorry, I'm moving, that my mouse is kind of screwed up. She says that she won't kill anyone ever again, and hugs him. And then we go to Plastow. We see Delia, and now we see Delia. She has this memory of this man walking out of the fire. Delia is the coroner, the one that was looking at the dead bodies. And she's holding the rose, and it's pricked her, and she's bleeding all over herself. So we know that this woman has a lot of guilt, and she seems to remember something about this whole event, and she has a lot of trauma about it. And so back to the shadow gallery, he's reading Evie a bedtime story. So the emphasis that she is a little girl is like constant throughout this text, until of course she comes of age, and that's going to happen. Spoiler alert. Then back to the nose, they realize that the resettlement camp. They put together, Inspector Finch and Dominic put together that V is killing all of the people who were involved in the Lark Hill resettlement camp. They see deceased, deceased, deceased. So then they realize that Delia, they're going to realize too late that Delia was one of these people. But then she wakes up and says, "Roses, you've come to kill me." He says, "Yes." She says, "Oh, thank God, thank God." She wants to die. So she's very guilt-stricken. and she's going to die as a consequence of her action. But at least she feels bad about it. I think there's something to be said for that. Although when you find out what she does, you might not be too sympathetic. Then back to Derek and his wife again, and he holds a gun to his wife's face. Like, he's an abusive alcoholic, basically, and he's really, really terrible. And he holds the gun to her face and says, click, and then he says, or bang, he says, don't worry, Rose, I didn't load it, not tonight. So he didn't load the gun. And then we go back to Inspector Finch, and he realizes that Delia, the coroner, is one of the people at Lark Hill. So they rush over there. They call all the people, the fingermen, to rush to the scene. And then, lo and behold, back to Delia. She's talking to V, and she talks about this experiment where people would shock other people. It's a psychological experiment that they did. So they weren't actually shocking anyone, but they wanted to see what people would do under command orders from people. So they had all these random people come in, and they were told that if they would press a button, it would administer a dose of electricity to an invisible person in another room. And so they would press the button, and they would hear the person screaming and then begging for them to stop, and then the person would tell them to press it again. And what they found was that even though the people really believed that they were hurting someone in the other room, if they were told by someone in authority to press the button, then they would. And some of them would even, a shocking percentage of them would even press the button until the person was believed to be dead. So this is a comment on people following orders and following authority. You know, you go back to post-World War II era, the Nuremberg trials. You know, I was just following orders. Is that a good excuse? Well, maybe, maybe not. But, you know, it didn't hold up in Nuremberg, and it probably isn't going to hold up here. But she's appalled that people would do that. And, like, we must be some hideous monsters, human beings. Then back to Derek, back to Almond. He realizes, Derek Almond, he realizes that, oh my God, I got to get it over to the coroner's house. V reveals that he's dispatched the coroner through lethal injection, which is actually a mercy, probably because he knows that she feels bad for what she did. So he executes her in a way where there won't be any pain. He gets into the hall, and there's Derek, and he's got his gun. I got you now, points the gun in his face, but oh, wait, you remember when you were threatening your wife? You didn't load your gun, dummy. So he's holding an unloaded gun at one of the strongest people in the world, and V proceeds to take advantage of this situation, dispatches the head of the Fingermen, kills him. Inspector Finch arrives. He's livid with what happened, but they find the coroner's diary. And so now we're going to learn the story. Well, who is this mysterious V character? What went on at Lark Hill Resettlement Camp? And the person who's going to find out is Inspector Finch. Now, Inspector Finch, we find out over the course of the story, he has a conscience. He was in love with Delia, the coroner, who had a conscience and felt bad for what she did. So does Inspector Finch. He kind of is he's not sure about his participation in fascist government. And then we see he's talking to the supreme leader and telling him about the diary and what happened there. And he explains that basically they had rounded up all of the, quote, degenerates, the people, minorities, the homosexuals, anyone that didn't fit the fascist mold. They brought them to the resettlement camp, and their intention was to do genetic experiments on them to see what would happen if they played with hormones and stuff like that. And Delia, the coroner, was the doctor in charge of running these experiments. And at first, she hates the people that she's doing the experiments to, and she's really, you know, sees them as animals. She also mentions Louis Prothero and how she hates him. And she mentions the man from room 5 and how the man from room 5 was the only one to promise. He didn't die from these experiments. Other people, they died from, like, growing tumors and weird appendages and stuff, and the genetic experiments really destroyed their bodies, but not the man in room 5. He seemed immune to it, and he seemed to be, like, electric and charismatic, she said, like a schizophrenic almost, has this magnetism. But they let the man from room 5 start to garden, and Prothero loves it because he loves to eat, right? And so they start letting him garden, and he's growing vegetables, and he's growing these roses. Now we see the theme of the roses. And it's a special type of rose that's extinct, actually, believed to be extinct. And he starts ordering, like, fertilizer and stuff and arranging these weird patterns on the floor. So we see that V had his mind destroyed by this process. And now we see why he did to Prothero what he did, because he wanted to destroy his mind in the way that his own mind was destroyed. And then back to Inspector Finch, and he's like, well, eventually it resumes, and it's after the fact when so basically V used the garden supplies to create bombs and napalm and stuff and blew up the compound and escaped. And she says she remembers the sound of men screaming and stuff, and he looked at me like a bug looks on a slide. Someone looks at a bug mounted on a slide, and that's how she looked at the prisoners. Remember, that's how she was treating those human beings as though they were insects. And so now she's getting a taste of her own medicine from this silhouetted character standing in the fire. Going back to the conversation, they're trying to figure out how did he go from being this man that escaped Larkhill to being codenamed V? How did he become this character, right? And so then they say he perhaps spent laying the groundwork for his elaborate plan, and he's been assassinating 40 people. So we thought, because of the high profile of these cases, that he had just started, but actually he's been at it for a long time. And we see that he's been clearing ground. There's all this buildup for, like, what is his plan? What's he going to do? What's his elaborate scheme, right? And he says you get sucked into it. I mean, fate doesn't have any records of what happened. Look, for all we know, this diary could be a complete and utter fake. Codename V could have written it himself. He might have never been at Larkhill at all. Do you see? It could all be another smokescreen, a false cover story. Mr. Finch, do you expect to believe me that anyone would kill people for any other reason than provide himself with a cover story? The very idea is madness. Ah, yes, I see. Very well. I think that will be all, Mr. Finch. England prevails. Oh, and Mr. Finch, Happy Christmas. So this Happy Christmas, the way he's looking at him, is kind of a threat. Like, you read that diary, you know what it is I did. You better watch your step, man. You know too much, right? We see this tension between them growing. Happy Christmas, right? And then we see him staring at the computer again. He loves that computer. And that's the end of Volume 3. So I'm going to stop there. I hope you're enjoying this text. There's a lot of interesting stuff that we can talk about later. So have a great I will continue volumes 4 and 5 in another video. Have a great